Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be a little talk through the 110 books we've got on the bookshelf over here. 90 of them are books I've already read, 20 of them are books that are on my to-be read list, and so for each of them, I'm going to talk through what the main lesson that I've learned from the book is and who I would recommend it for. As usual, timestamps to everything down below. Let's get started. All right, book number one is Think Big, Take Small Steps, and Build the Future You Want by Dr. Grace Lorden. She actually appeared in an episode of the Deep Dive podcast, link down below if you want to check it out. And Dr. Lorden is a behavioral scientist, and this is basically, it's like genuinely a really good book. I listened to it on Audible initially, but then I got the physical copy, because why not? And it's basically an encyclopedia of all of the different insights from behavioral science and behavioral economics about how we can get ahead in our careers. And her general broad thesis here is that we want to think big, i.e. set a goal for me plus, kind of that version of ourselves that we want to be, and then break it down into smaller steps to achieve the goal. And that sounds obvious. We all kind of know that advice, but to be honest, there's loads of stuff along the way in this book that I actually didn't know that I found quite surprising, quite interesting. So if you want to learn more about that, check out the Deep Dive podcast, link down below. Next on the list, we have Atomic Habits by James Clear. Huge mega bestseller, fantastic book. There's so many people I know who've read this book who've told me that it's the single best self-improvement book they have ever read, and often the only self-improvement book that these people have ever read. The basic premise is that to build good habits and break bad ones, we should focus on the small 1% improvement changes that we can make over a very long period of time. And then he talks about the 4 different laws of habit change, about how we can actually do that. And if you want to learn more, I actually have 2 videos all about this book. One is a full episode of book club and one is a short as well, again linked down below. Next we have The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Now this is a book that I have actually not yet read. I've read multiple summaries of this book. My favorite one is the one in short form, link down below if you want to check it out. But this is definitely on my TBR because every time I even flick through this, I'm just like, bloody hell, this book is incredible. And it's super old and it's like the OG self-improvement book, which combines all of the insights from the whole world of like things to help us be better people, build better habits, all that kind of stuff into one book. It's really dense. It's really long. It's definitely on my read list for this year. Then we have Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. Now, I first listened to this last year and I listened to it on Audible, and I'd really recommend the Audible narration version because on Audible, after the narrator narrates each chapter, then he literally has a chat with David Goggins, like in the recording studio, about like going deeper into some of the things there. I'd never really seen David Goggins stuff before listening to the book, but it was absolutely incredible and like super motivating. I'm not a huge fan of his whole philosophy around like suffering is good and you gotta like push through suffering and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't really vibe with me because I'm kind of soft, but genuinely really good book. Link down below if you want to check it out. Next we have the book The Gap and the Gain by Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan. Dan Sullivan is this really famous business coach. Ben Hardy is a psychologist and author. And the subtitle here is The High Achiever's Guide to Happiness, Confidence, and Success. So it's trying to do quite a lot of things. And basically their core thesis and why it's called The Gap and the Gain is that when we are measuring ourselves, we should measure the gain, like how far we've come, rather than the gap between where we are now and where we want to be. And the whole thing is that if you apply this insight to all the different areas of your life, it makes you much more confident, much happier, and potentially even leads to more success. Next, we have The Third Door by Alex Banayan. I think I read this in 2019. One of my favorite books of all time. Absolutely fantastic, and I've recommended this to so many people. It sounds on the surface to be like a book for like career advice and business advice, but it's told as a sort of narrative where Alex is a 22-year-old college student, and he's on a mission to try and interview the world's most successful people to figure out what it is that made them tick when they were his age. And he starts off the journey intending to write a book of life advice, but it ends up being this like personal transformation narrative about how, you know, the stuff he's learned personally along the way while trying to interview these famous successful people, and it's all about the concept of the third door. Genuinely, absolutely game-changing book. I think I cried at the end of it multiple times. I even cried at the end of the acknowledgement section. Like, it was that good. The acknowledgement section is like the best acknowledgement section I've ever read. So yeah, 100% would recommend The Third Door by Alex Banayan. Next, we have The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. I have not read this, but it's part of my research for the book that I'm writing, so we'll see what happens. Next, we have Mindset by Carol Dweck, which is all about this idea of fixed mindset versus growth mindset. It's a really good book. It's very dense, quite hard to get through, a little bit academic, sometimes a little bit dry, but to be honest, you can get most of the value from the book by just reading the short form book summary or checking out my book club video on the topic. Next, we have The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday, 366 meditations on wisdom, perseverance, and the art of living. He's also got an email. To be honest, I read the email. I have not yet read the book, but I mean, it's really nice. And it's nice to flick through occasionally to be like, you know, May the 23rd, show me how to live. April the 10th, judgments cause disturbance, and just like little nice snippets of wisdom that you can get from the world of the Stoics. Nice one, Ryan Holiday. Next, we have a little small self-published book, Superhuman Social Skills by Tynan, a guide to being likable, winning friends, and building your social circle, which is actually really good. I read this a few years ago, got a large amount of value from it, helped me become a better storyteller, and helped me think more intentionally about my social life and, you know, treating it a little bit more like something that I could actively improve. Next, we have Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before by Dr. Julie Smith, who is a clinical psychologist, 3 million followers on TikTok, enormous social media presence, gives a lot of really good advice about mental health, about anxiety, about things like that. And I also interviewed her on an episode of the Deep Dive podcast, link down below. And this book is good because it's not the sort of book that you need to read cover to cover. It's more like it's a guide to all the different issues that we might struggle with in life, and kind of each little issue has a few pages where she uses her experience as a clinical psychologist, as a therapist, to kind of explain how we can go about solving that problem for ourselves. So for example, she talks about things like motivation, emotional pain, grief, self-doubt, fear, stress, and then the final chapter, which is my favorite, on a meaningful life. So yeah, solid book by Dr. Julie Smith. Then we have Time Smart by Ashley Williams, How to Reclaim Your Time and Live a Happier Life. This admittedly is on my to be read list because it's going to be part of the research for the book that I'm working on myself. And then we have another productivity book, Make Time, How to Focus on What Matters Every Day by Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky, which is in fact one of my favorite productivity books of all time, and I actually have a book club episode about this, which you can check out if you want. Next we have Deep Work by Cal Newport, an absolute cult classic that basically talks about why the secret to getting things done is to lock yourself up in a room and actually just work for extended periods of time without being interrupted by random shit that comes up. Again, the book is pretty dense. You don't necessarily need to read it to get the core idea, and you can get a summary of it, for example, on short form if you want. But this was published in 2016, and over the last 6 years, it's become an absolute cult classic in the world of productivity, so well done, Cal Newport, for that one. Next, we have 4,000 Weeks, Time and How to Use It by Oliver Burkeman, which was very recently published. And again, we have an interview with Oliver Burkeman on the Deep Dive podcast, link down below. But this is a really good book. It's very interesting. Basically, it's all about the finitude of existence, and it's about how our like struggle to manage our time and make the most from our time is fundamentally misguided. Life is short. We can only do a finite number of things, and so we should be intentional about what are the things we're going to cut out from our life and what are the things we're going to do in it, rather than feeling this frenetic desire to be more and more and more productive. And then we have Empowered by our friend V Kativu, Live Your Life with Passion and Purpose. And again, we have an interview with her on the Deep Dive podcast. This is fantastic, isn't it? This is basically V's book on how she's grown up through various forms of adversity and the kind of life lessons she's learned along the way. And it's nice because she's not trying to be a guru. She's kind of very much speaking from her own personal experience. And it's a beautifully designed book as well. It's like absolutely beautiful and an absolute joy. I read it initially on Kindle, but now I have multiple copies of this just because it's so nice to leaf through once in a while. Next, a little book, Anything You Want by Derek Sivers, 40 Lessons for a New Kind of Entrepreneur, one of my favorite books of all time, and the book that's probably top 3 in books that changed my life, which I first talked about way back in 2018. Next, we have The Courage to Be Disliked, which is amazing. How to Free Yourself, Change Your Life, and Achieve Real Happiness. All of the slogans for these books are a little bit somewhat cringe. Mine is probably going to be the same as well. It's a really good book. It basically tells the story of a young man speaking to a philosopher, and it's in the form of a dialogue. Well, the young man says this, philosopher says that, and it's essentially all about Adlerian psychology. Adler was like one of the 3 pro-psychologists like Freud and Jung, but he's the one that most people have not heard of. And there's a bunch of really controversial points in the book, like the fact that trauma does not exist and that all problems in life are interpersonal relationship problems. And it's very juicy, it's somewhat controversial, and we've got a book club about this coming in a little while. Next, we have The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, a guide to spiritual enlightenment, and I'm actually in the process of reading this right now. I don't quite get it just yet, but I'm finding myself getting glimpses of enlightenment as I'm reading it. So more on that to come once I've become enlightened, then I will share it on this YouTube channel. Next, we have Ego's the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Very good introduction to the world of Stoicism, which is basically all of the stuff that Ryan Holiday writes about. Then we have Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, absolute classic amongst people I follow on Twitter. Really dense. I've read about 10 pages of it, and it's really hard to get through, but I intend to read more of that this year. Next, we have Digital Minimalism by our friend Cal Newport. Again, I have not read this cover to cover. I did read a summary, and I think I got most of the insights from it, but this is also part of research that I'm doing for my own book that I'm writing. Next, we have 2 books, A Master's Secret Whispers and Atmamun by Kapil Gupta, MD. These are books, again, about like enlightenment and spiritual development and stuff. And funny story, I actually tweeted at him saying I was starting to read one of these books, and he replied to my tweet saying, "You are probably not ready for this book." Like, what a burn. What an absolute burn. But also these are actually quite good books that I need to reread to really get the most value out of them. I'm sure I'll be revisiting them at various points throughout my life on my journey to spiritual enlightenment or something like that. Kapil, if you're watching this, you're probably not, but I'd love to interview you on the podcast if you want to come on. Next, we have Hell Yeah or No, again by Derek Sivers, What's Worth Doing. Derek Sivers, one of my favorite writers on the internet. Very, very, very short book. I bought about 10 copies. 8 of which I've given away to various friends. 100% would recommend this short book about life advice. And then, of course, we have The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. I've talked about this book ad nauseum already. It's the single book that has most single-handedly changed the trajectory of my life. Again, Tim, if you're watching this, you're probably not, but would love to interview you on the podcast at some point. All right, we're getting into the middle of the bookshelf. Next, we have The Status Game by Will Storr. Enormous book, basically about on social position and how we use it. I listened to this on Audible rather than reading the book. The book is huge. And I've even interviewed Will Storr on the Deep Dive podcast, where we talked all about the main thesis of his book, the idea of status, and how everything that we do as humans is ultimately geared towards increasing our social status. And I find this to be a really interesting topic because whenever I think, what are my own motivations for doing YouTube? It's hard to get away from the social status, the prestige, the money, the fame, all of that stuff that comes with being a YouTuber. So super interesting look at how all of human society has basically evolved to play status games. Next, we have What to Expect When You're Expecting. I have not yet read this one. And next, we have How to Not Die Alone by Logan Ury, which is the book that's most single-handedly changed my love life, and a book that my now girlfriend recommended to me when we were first starting to date. And one of my favorite episodes of the Deep Dive podcast was an interview I did with Logan Ury, the author, talking all about how we can optimize our dating life and how we can ultimately aim for actually not dying alone. So link below if you want to check that out. Next, we have The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, which is probably the book, I read it on Kindle, that I've highlighted the most out of. I basically felt like I was highlighting every single sentence in the book. If you haven't come across Naval, he's like an angel investor, he's a tech bro based in the US, and he's also like a philosopher. And he has all these philosophies about life, about wealth, about happiness, about success. And this book is written by Eric Jorgensen, where he summarized all of the things that Naval has said through all of his tweets, all of his interviews, all of his appearances, into this very digestible guide, a guide to wealth and happiness. So 100% would recommend. Next, we have Models by Mark Manson, Attract Women Through Honesty. It's by far the best book I've ever read on the topic, and I've read a few other books in the genre, just for fun, obviously. And basically it's all about how you can become a more attractive man, not by relying on tricks and manipulation and routine, like some of the other books teach you, but instead about how you can cultivate inner confidence and inner strength, and how you can just improve yourself as a person. So it's more like a self-development book rather than a how to get girls kind of book, even though that's sort of the title and thumbnail on the cover. Then we have Unconditional Parenting by Alfie Kohn. I've actually listened to this twice on Audible, it's that good. And I'm not yet a parent, but I'm hoping to apply the insights when I become a parent, but I would recommend this to anyone who has ever been a child because it will be really, really interesting. Next, we have A Little Happier, Notes for Reassurance by Darren Brown. This is a fairly recently published book. It's sort of like the summary of his huge book called Happy, which is one of my favorite books about happiness and stoicism. This is like a condensed version of the insights from that. Although I would recommend the main book if you can get through the somewhat difficult to read prose, because he's quite like verbose with his words. Although, freaking love Darren Brown. Darren, again, if you're watching this, you're probably not, but would love to interview you. You are my absolute dream guest to have on the podcast at some point. Next, we have Bill Perkins' Die With Zero, where the premise is that you should reach the end of your life with $0 in your bank account, and if you have any more than that, you have done something wrong. If you're concerned about the kids and what about charity, his point is that if you want to give money to your kids, give it to them when they're young, in their 20s or 30s, when they can make the most use of it, rather than when they are 67 and you die. And similarly, if you actually do want to give money to charity, charities need money right now, and donating on your deathbed is probably a suboptimal way of giving to charity. But either way, it's kind of a book about how to make the most of life, how to maximize a life experience, while thinking a little bit harder about money being a thing that we can exchange for life experiences, rather than being this thing that we hoard for the sake of it, like a lot of us tend to do. Next, we have Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. I've read this a few times in my life. The first time I read this was about like 7 years ago. And it's a bit controversial these days because it's quite like gendered, but it genuinely gave me some tools that were helpful when it came to understanding the way that I communicate, and that's different to the way that most of my female friends, for example, communicate. And next, of course, we have 50 Shades of Grey, which is an entertaining and sometimes educational read as well. I've completely lost count of where we are, but the next one is The Happiness Advantage by Sean Acker, which is a really good book, kind of dry, but genuinely very good. And he talks about the 7 principles that fuel success and performance at work. And the core thesis is that people who are happier perform better at work, rather than people who perform better at work end up getting rewards and end up being happier. And I have a book club episode about this very book linked down below if you want to check it out. Next, we have Your Money or Your Life, which is a book that has genuinely changed my relationship with money. And the core thesis that Vicki Robbins talks about is the idea that money is the thing that we exchange our life force for. Like, we go to work to make money, and yes, we get all these other different benefits from work, but ultimately we could get all of those benefits from volunteering if we really wanted to. And so really the reason we work is for money. And if we recognize that, then it kind of changes our relationship with work. And this is a book that enormously shaped my own decision to leave medicine, for example. And next, we have The Course of Love by Alain de Botton, which is in fact one of my top 3 most gifted books. And it basically tells a story of this like couple, but like chapter 1 and 2 is when they get married, and the rest of the book is what happens while they are married. And it's really interesting. It talks about all the arguments, all the issues, the infidelity that goes on. And his point really is that, like so many of us, you know, love stories stop at the point when they get together. But actually, it's after people have gotten together, once they've gotten married, once they're in a relationship, that most of the real problems start to happen. And we should try and develop a little bit more understanding about what that's like, so that when we're in those positions, we've got the tools needed to kind of overcome them. And next, we in fact have a trilogy of books: Steal Like an Artist, Show Your Work, and Keep Going by Austin Kleon. The second one in the series, Show Your Work, is the book that first encouraged me to start a blog and later encouraged me to start a YouTube channel. So this book has had an enormous impact on my life. Steal Like an Artist is very good if you're concerned about originality and creativity, and its whole point is that you should, well, steal like an artist. And Keep Going is a nice little reminder, like if you're struggling with creative work, like whatever you're doing, then Keep Going has like 10 different tips about how you can break through those creative blocks. All three are really good. They take about 20 minutes to read each, if not less than that. So 100% would recommend the whole trilogy. Next, we have Jab, 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 Right Hook by Gary Vaynerchuk. Incredible book that was way ahead of its time. I think he wrote it in like 2009. And this basically talks about how to make a living on the internet by really leading with free content and providing value to the audience, i.e. jabs, and then occasionally landing a right hook where you ask for something like, for example, subscribe to my channel or buy my product or whatever. Next, we have Who, the A Method for Hiring, which is a book all about hiring if you run a business. I wish I'd discovered this 2 years ago. I, in fact, only read it a few months ago after I'd already hired about 16 people. Next, we have Good to Great by Jim Collins, absolute classic in the world of business, about the 5 or so different skills that separate good businesses from great businesses. Then we have High Velocity Hiring, which is a book that's on my TBR. I've not read it yet because I'm trying to understand more about how to hire better. No offense to anyone in the room. And next we have The Minimalist Entrepreneur by Sahil Lavingya, who's the founder of Gumroad. And this is now one of the books that I most recommend to people who are thinking of starting a business, because it's very much about building a community first and a business second. And I think that's the right order of operations to do things in 2022 and beyond. Next, we have The Great CEO Within, incredible, very, very short book by Matt Mukri. And next we have The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel, one of my favorite books about money, 15 different rules for how money affects our psychology and our life. And I've even got a book club episode about it if you want to learn the lessons without having to read the book. Next, we have The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, which was recommended to me by Julian Hearn, the founder of Huel, when he appeared on the Deep Dive podcast. And I'm literally in the process of reading this right now and encouraging everyone on our team to read it as well, because it's just an absolute cult classic. Next, we have Start With Why by Simon Sinek, How Great Leaders Inspire Everyone to Take Action, the global bestseller apparently. This is a book I have not yet read. I've read summaries of it multiple times and seen loads of his talks on YouTube, so I think I kind of get the idea, but this is going to form part of the research of the book that I'm writing, so it's on my TBR. Next, we have The New 1 Minute Manager, really, really short read, which is just absolutely sick for anyone who is a manager. And next we have this tiny book, Powerful by Patty McCord, which is all about kind of how Netflix creates a high performance culture. So not really relevant for most normal people, but if you run a business and you have a team, this is a really good read. Next we have The Millionaire Fastlane. Again, one of the books I most recommend to anyone who's thinking of starting a business, because it's just absolutely encyclopedic and packed with really useful insights, and is very, very easy to read, written in a really nice and accessible way. And then we have The 4 Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive. Really, really good book, but very much recommended if you are a leader within an organization. And then we have The Pathless Path by my friend Paul Millard. This is absolutely sick. I've given away about 8 copies of this book so far, and we've got another 10 in the studio that he sent to us, because I just love giving this book away to basically anyone who is struggling with figuring out what they're trying to do in their life. And Paul's story is really inspiring, and the way he encouraged us to think a little bit harder about what we actually want to do with our career, what we actually want to do with our life, and not necessarily following a prescribed path, hence the idea of the pathless path. So if you're in the same position that I am and maybe a little bit unsure of what you want to do in life with your career in particular, you should definitely check this out, because it's a very interesting perspective that I haven't really come across before. Next, we have Happy Sexy Millionaire, Unexpected Truths About Fulfillment, Love, and Success by Stephen Bartlett. And it's hard to describe this, so I'm just going to read out the blurb. As an 18-year-old black, broke, lonely, insecure university dropout from a bankrupt family, I wrote in my diary that I wanted to be a happy, sexy millionaire by the age of 25. By 25, I was a multimillionaire, having created a business worth over $300 million. Ironically, in achieving everything I set out to, I learned that I was wrong about almost everything. The world had lied to me. It lied to me about how you attain fulfillment, love, and success, why those things matter, and what those words actually mean. And so this is 20 different chapters, 20 different little life lessons that Stephen has picked up along the way. Very, very inspiring, really nice to listen to on Audible, would 100% recommend. Next, we have Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, which is really popular in the world of psychology. I've not yet read it. It's on my to-be-read list, again, for book research. Next, we have Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal, US Army retired, New Rules of Engagement for a Complex World. Again, I have not yet read this, but it's on my list because I've heard it's very good in terms of team culture and working with a team. Next, we have Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber. Really, really entertaining read. I have highlighted a lot of it. I read this analog. I even put little stickers in place in paragraphs that I wanted to highlight. It's basically about the rise of pointless work and what we can do about it. Really, really entertaining and informative, and somewhat depressing book around how a lot of the jobs that we do are kind of bullshitty and kind of pointless at the end of the day. And next, we have Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as if Your Life Depended on It by Chris Voss, which I've listened to twice on Audible so far, and every time I listen to it, I get some new insights about negotiation. Next, we have The Personal MBA by Josh Kaufman, a world-class business education in a single volume, and I'm slowly making my way through it over time because it's a very, very, very dense read, but really good so far. Next, we have The Unfair Advantage by my friends Ash Ali and Hassan Kuba, who I got to know while interviewing them when they were doing promo for their book. And basically it's about the idea that success is not just about hard work, it's also about unfair advantages, and how a lot of the successful people that we know today had unfair advantages that you and I don't have. But the nice part is that we all have our own unfair advantages, and it just encourages us to figure out what those advantages are so that we can potentially have more success in business and in life. Next, we have The E-Myth Revisited, Why Most Small Businesses Don't Work and What to Do About It. I read this in 2019, and it's the book that's most changed my life beyond once I actually started a business that was successful. And I've recommended this to so many creators and entrepreneurs who are at the point where their business is successful, but they are feeling burnt out because they haven't yet delegated or built a team around them. So this is absolutely brilliant for that if you're in that position. And next we have Overlap, which is a self-published book by my friend Sean McCabe. And this is a book about how you can build a side hustle while retaining your full-time job. And his idea is that you don't just want to quit your job and do your side hustle. You want to overlap them. You want to work on your side hustle on the evenings and weekends until it gets to a point where it makes enough money that you can then quit your job if that's what you really want. And this is really good. I came across this after I had already accidentally done it, but it's a book that I recommend to anyone who is in that position where they want to build that side hustle, but they want to do the job at the same time, and they don't just want to kind of be up and dry without anything if the side hustle doesn't work. Next, we have Goal, which is a book I've not yet read, which is going to form my book research, all about goals. And then we have Traction, which is a book I read in 2021 and was probably, again, in 2021, the book that most accelerated our business trajectory. It was the E-Myth way back in 2019 and then Traction in 2021. If you've got a business and you have more than 3 employees, I would recommend this. It's not very relevant before that point. And then we have The Visual MBA, a quick guide to everything you'll learn in 2 years of business school, which is again more of a reference book and like really nice to flick through rather than a book that you necessarily read cover to cover. We have It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work by DHH and Jason Fried, the Basecamp fellas. I love this. I've read it about 4 times so far, highlighted the hell out of it. It's fantastic. And then we have Principles by Ray Dalio, which all of the tech bros absolutely rave on about. I haven't read it cover to cover. It's more of like a sort of reference book, but I think his way of achieving goals and goal setting and stuff is particularly interesting. Again, this book, it's just really nice as well. It's one of those books that you just have on your bookshelf, you pick up occasionally, turn to a random page, and you think, oh, damn, this is actually really good. I should probably read the whole thing. But next we have Scale or Fail, How to Build Your Dream Team, Explode Your Growth, and Let Your Business Soar. Again, I've not yet read this. It's on my TBR for the year. And then we have Oversubscribed by Daniel Priestley, which is a book I have read repeatedly and is my most highlighted book on Kindle of all time. It's just absolutely sick. I've recommended it to so many people who run creator type businesses and they've all been like, oh my God, this is absolutely sick. So if you run a business and you are a creator running a business, this is absolutely required reading. If you're not in that position, you probably won't get much value from it, but it might be kind of interesting anyway. Next we have The Mom Test by Rob Fitzpatrick, which is a book that me and my team have read when we do interviews with customers about how we can make our courses better. It's kind of short, kind of easy read. It's good for that sort of thing. And then we have Primal Branding by Patrick Hanlon, which is looking at all of the 7 or 8 different components that the most powerful brands in the world, the sort of brands that have zealots behind them, like Apple and Starbucks, rather than like Dell, for example. Like, what are the elements that those like high value, highly loved brands have in common, and how can we apply those principles to our own brand or our own business? Next, we have a really nondescript book, How to Hire A Players, again on my TBR. And we have 9 Lies About Work, which I've listened to twice on Audible as a full run through and revisited certain chapters because it's really, really interesting if you are an employee at a company and you don't really enjoy your job, or if you're managing a company and you want to figure out how like ways to make things better. Next, we have The Only Study Guide You'll Ever Need by Unjaded Jade. And this is genuinely the only study guide you'll ever need. So if you're a student and you're looking for a guide on how to study for your exams in a better way, 100% would recommend this. And I've even written 2 or 3 paragraphs for one of the sections around spaced repetition and around timetables, so you might enjoy that. Next, we have a duet, Tools of Titans and a Tribe of Mentors by Tim Ferriss. Again, these are more reference books rather than read cover to cover books. I've read some percentage of both of them. I tend to just pick it up randomly, turn it to a random page, and always find some useful insights about life. Then we have Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning, which is the book that I previously used to recommend to all students before Jade's book came out. It's still a very good read. It's not just about how you can study more efficiently for exams, but it's about how to learn more things more effectively in general. And so it's good if you want to be like me, you know, trying to be a student for life, a bit of a lifelong learner, that kind of jazz. Next, we have 4 books that I've not yet read: The Upside of Stress, Mindful Self-Discipline, This is Marketing by Seth Godin, and How to Fail Almost Everything and Still Win Big by Scott Adams. Again, books on my TBR for this year. Next, we have Bootstrap Your Life by Oliver Cookson, the founder of MyProtein, who turned 500 pounds into 350 million pounds. And I actually flew all the way over to Monaco to do an interview with him for the Deep Dive podcast, so you can check that out, link down below. And finally, we have Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty, who I'm hoping to have on the podcast at some point. And you can find out more about the book by watching my book club episode about this, because this video is getting very, very, very long. And we're going to do a little quick interruption to tell you about the sponsor of this video, who's made this video possible, and that is Brilliant. If you haven't heard by now, Brilliant is a fantastic online education platform for courses in maths, science, and computer science. I've been using Brilliant for the last 2 years, and the courses are genuinely very, very good because they're highly engaging and they teach you stuff from first principles rather than in the sort of didactic spoon-feeding way that you learn in school. My favorite courses are the ones in computer science, because when I was initially applying to med school, I was actually torn between computer science and medicine. And I ended up going with medicine in the end, which I don't regret. But there's so much stuff in the world of computer science, like algorithms and programming and understanding how it all works, that I just never really had a solid background in, even though I did some coding and some web design. So Brilliant's courses have been really helpful in giving me that foundational understanding, and it does it through really interesting problems like the generals problem and these other like thought puzzles that like are really hard to solve unless you know how to code. And then they talk you through how you can build the algorithms to help solve some of these things. They've got a really good course on cryptocurrencies, which helps build up the concepts of Bitcoin and things like that from the ground up, about how you would invent a cryptocurrency if you had to invent one, which is how personally I got a firm grounding in the theory behind crypto, which is what made me comfortable to invest so much money in it. And they've got a great series on neural networks as well, if you're interested in, for example, machine learning and AI and how that all fits into the world that we live in today. So if that sounds up your street and you want to check Brilliant out, then head over to brilliant.org/Ali, and the first 200 people to hit that link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription. So thank you so much to Brilliant for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to the tour. All right, so that was bookshelf number 1. We're now going to switch to bookshelf number 2, so see you in just a second. All right, we are now in bookshelf number 2, where we are on the final straight of these 110 or something books. And the first one here is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. The Stormlight Archive is now my favorite fiction series of all time other than Harry Potter, but nothing can beat Harry Potter because obviously Harry Potter has the nostalgia value. But if you're going to start with Brandon Sanderson, you should start with The Final Empire, which is the first book in the Mistborn series. Because The Way of Kings is a bit slow to get started. Stormlight Archive is very, very, very long. It's amazing, but it's really long. And if you're new to Sanderson, Sanderson is now my favorite author of all time, even more favorite than J.K. Rowling, lol. But yeah, Final Empire and the Mistborn trilogy is just like, oh, it's so freaking good. I've recommended it to so many people. I've read it repeatedly, listened to it repeatedly on Audible. It's just absolutely freaking sick, as is the Stormlight Archive. Oh my God. If you have not yet started reading Brandon Sanderson, you are in for a treat. You need to read these books. Right, next we have Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. Genuinely, pretty good book. I thought Twilight and Breaking Dawn were my favorites. I wasn't too much of a fan of New Moon and Eclipse, but yeah, it's just here because it's entertaining and also somewhat educational as well. Next we have Artemis Fowl by Eoin Colfer. I actually have a bunch of fiction books that I read throughout my life. This is one of them that I got a lot of inspiration from when I was like 12 years old. So yeah, would recommend if you're 12, for example. And then we have 5 on a Treasure Island, the first book in the Famous 5 series, which was the series that really first got me into reading, I think. So this book had a big impact on my life. It's really good. Next, we have Happy by Derren Brown, which is my favorite book about happiness and stoicism, which I've also highlighted the hell out of. It's really long, it's really dense, it's quite hard to get through, but if you can get through it, it's really, really, really good. Obviously, we've got Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, favorite series of all time, just because nostalgia value and because Harry Potter is incredible. We have Noughts and Crosses by Malorie Blackman, which is actually a sick series. Yeah, first real time that I got introduced. I first read this when I was like 8. First introduced to the ideas behind like racism and prejudice and things like that. So very good on that side of things. Next we have Slave to Sensation, which is book 1 of the Psy Changeling series, which has got like 18 books in it now, which is paranormal romance. I started reading these in like 2017. Yeah, I started reading them in 2017. They're really good. I read each new one as it comes out. It's good if you like slightly R-rated paranormal romance and that is your jam. And then we have The Recruit, which is book 1 of the Cherub series by Robert Muchamore. These had a huge impact on me when I was about like 11 to 15 years old. And like I had this big dream of like inventing my own like spy agency, and that was like the first business idea that me and my friends in school had. We were like going to make like an agency for like kids who wanted to learn how to be spies. So we were going to make a forum and a website that teaches them how to do lockpicking and how to do like hacking and stuff. And that was the project that first taught me how to do web design. So I'm very in debt to Robert Muchamore because this book formed the basis of my business activities for the next like 16 years. All right, we are nearly done. Next, we have Live Well Every Day by Dr. Alex George, who I'll be interviewing on the podcast at some point. This is good. It's kind of reference. It's all about basically everything you need to know about living well every day. Next, we have a signed copy of Doctor's Kitchen 321. Eat well, be well, love, Dr. Rupy, who I interviewed on the podcast. That episode will be up on the Deep Dive channel at some point, so you should subscribe to the channel. But this is a book of recipes, essentially, so I'm going to be incorporating some of these into my own diet. Next, we have Do This For You by Chrissy Chella, who we also interviewed on the podcast. How to be a strong woman from the inside out. Not directly targeted at my demographic, but still a pretty solid read, like good stuff around motivation, around consistency, around discipline, all the things that I sometimes struggle with, so nice one, Chrissy Chella on that front. Next, we have a signed copy of The Life-Changing Magic of Numbers by Bobby Seagull, who also featured on the podcast. He's written a nice little message in this. I'll be honest, I've not read it. It's probably not on my TBR for this year, but it's a signed book, and therefore we're going to keep it around. It's kind of cool. Next, we have What's Your Story? A workbook for the storyteller in all of us by Margot Lightman, which is again on my TBR. It's got a bunch of interactive exercises for how to become a better storyteller. So this is a book that, you know, I'm on my journey to try and become hopefully a better storyteller. And then we have a physical copy of Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. This was the best book that I read in 2020. Absolutely sick. Really good book about how to become a better storyteller, but also really like heart-rending and emotional and really nice. Made me cry in various places. And in fact, Matthew has a new book coming out, which I've got early access to. So hopefully we'll be doing a book club episode about that as it gets launched in the next few months. Next, we have another book by my friend Bobby Seagull, the Monkman and Seagull quiz book, which again is not a read cover to cover, but we are actually using this when we're doing quizzes in the office. We have Radical, a business book by Ricardo Semler, which was recommended to me by Noah Kagan, and he says it's absolutely sick. I've not yet read it because it's not available on Audible or on Kindle, so I have to read it in physical copy version. I just haven't gotten around to doing that yet, but apparently it's sick because this guy used to run his business in like a very rogue fashion, which is more in line with how I want to run mine. So it's going to be read at some point this year. Thank you, Noah, for the recommendation. Next, we have draft number 4 by John McPhee on the writing process, which is basically a how-to guide of how to write well. I've started reading a bit of it, but because I'm still in the structural stages of my book, it's not entirely relevant to me just yet, so it's on the TBR for the year. Next, we have the Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. Atul Gawande is a doctor and a surgeon, and this is an absolute cult classic that completely transformed healthcare in terms of like surgical safety and checklists and all that kind of stuff. And there's actually a lot of principles that we can apply from the Checklist Manifesto to our own businesses, especially if you're a creator. Like processifying the various things you're doing in your job as a creator through checklists is like a really useful thing to do. And he talks about insights from the world of Formula One, from the world of aviation, from the world of medicine in this fantastic book, the Checklist Manifesto. Next, we have Educated, a memoir by Tara Westover. I listened to this on Audible last year or the year before. Really, really, really good. It's a story of a kind of survivalist Mormon family and how this girl Tara wasn't allowed to go to school because her family didn't believe in school, wasn't allowed to go to the doctor because her dad didn't believe in modern medicine, and she ends up, it's a story of how she ends up getting educated over time. It's really good. Made me cry in various places. A really harrowing story in a lot of places as well, but 100% would recommend. Next, we have the Ashley Vance biography of Elon Musk, which is good. I think it only goes up to like 2015, so it doesn't talk about the cool stuff he's done since then, but it's a really good introduction to the world of Elon Musk and how he became who he is today. And finally, we have my friend Simon Clark's new book, Firmament, the hidden science of weather, climate change, and the air that surrounds us. Bit of a departure from tradition because it's not a personal development book, but I actually owe Simon quite a lot because he was the inspiration that first started off my YouTube channel way back in 2017. And so this is again on my TBR at some point because I want to understand the whole climate change stuff and understand why he's so like keen on the topic as a climate scientist. Right, so that was 110 books on the bookshelf. If you got to the end of the video, I'd love it if you can leave a clover emoji in the comments because I'm so curious if anyone actually watched the end of it. And if you like this, then here is a playlist of the other book club episodes I've done where I summarize my favorite books and like insights from them and insights that have had an impact on my life. So thank you so much for watching. Please do hit the subscribe button if you aren't already. I'm gonna have some lunch and a drink and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.